native in the wild. I'll introduce myself at the end of the talk. Let's directly jump into what this thing is. If I don't connect my presenter, it's going to be hard for it to work. So now, in 2013, React was released. It was a tool that Facebook developed internally to solve common problems that they had with, like performant web apps, okay? And it was a library that used to do and uses to do just one thing, which is handling the view part of your software, of your components, okay? I think React is, pretty good because it introduced a lot of new concepts like virtual DOM, directional data flow, and those are things that, were pretty new back in the day. So, the fact that it's completely component-based, you write a component and you can reuse it somewhere else out of the box, it's pretty nice. The fact that it implements Flux as a pattern is, pretty awesome. There is a lot of other bullshit in React that, might make more or less sense to you. I think the really ugly part of React is first bumping into its syntax. So this is somehow a slide that represents a React component at its worst. You'll get some shit here, shit here, shit here, shit here, and shit here. Okay. At the end of the day, I think bumping into React is not the easiest thing ever. And I'm not going to be here telling you, how React.js works and, how to build applications with it. We're going to be looking at its native counterpart, which is based on React in React.js, but it adds on top of it, the ability to run on mobile platforms. Now, what Facebook did back in the day, they forked React.js. React Native runs with a fork of React.js that they update on a monthly basis because some things, don't always work as expected when they upgrade. And they decided, in 2015, they're like, it doesn't make sense anymore for us to write the same exact freaking logic that we write in Objective-C or in Swift in Java, okay? Because it's, a painful process to just think in terms of manpower, it's going to kill us. And the interesting part is that the guys who actually wrote React Native are native engineers, okay? So they used to work with Swift, Objective-C, or Java, and they're like, look, it doesn't make sense that we redo the work all the time. Let's take something that our company has made, like a really nice library like React, and let's try to use it on mobile native on native platforms. What they say is, for them it's very, very inefficient. Now, if you look at the history of Facebook apps, you've seen, first they would develop native apps, then they did that hybrid thingy with HTML5 and so on, and it would kill the user experience. It killed the user experience back then, so they decided, okay, let's go back to native, and this was, I think, 3-4 years ago. So it would kill the user experience back then. It would still kill the user experience. So what they actually had to do with React was to find a different trick to have something hybrid run on mobile platforms. For them, the big reason is the manpower, so the overhead that you spend rewriting things twice, and the fact that mobile development in general is much different from the web as we thought of until today, where you just press a button and you see the whole page with the changes. There you have to build, compile, blah 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 blah, and it's a much more cumbersome process. The way they do it is through a JS runtime. So you have V8 for Chrome. You've got this thing for WebKit called JavaScript Core. It's a JavaScript virtual machine. So it can run and execute JavaScript code, okay, on iOS devices. So it really does have no HTML, nothing whatsoever. That's actually a native library, a native runtime for JavaScript that renders things, okay? There's no HTML, there's no whatsoever. They have a bridge between, of course, the native code in Objective-C or in Java and their JavaScript code. But what they do is they map JavaScript methods with their native counterpart. They make this VM execute those operations, those functions they get results back that are mapped into native objects. Okay, so the overhead is really like translating this thing and handing it off to a JavaScript engine. But in terms of view, the look and feel of the app, you have native buttons, you have everything as a native app. It's just like calculations are offloaded to a JavaScript virtual machine. The way they do it, it's also not as optimal as you would do it with a traditional mobile app. They do it in 3 threads. They have a main thread, they have a JavaScript thread where they run all the code. Then they get back results from that thread, and they start rendering and so on and so forth. Now, how many of you guys are actually, JavaScript developer versus, like non-native developers? So basically everyone. Who is native mobile developer here? We got a few of you. We don't want to get you out of your job, okay? Because at the end of the day, we are also experimenting a lot in our company with React Native, and we've seen that, you can't really build, like a stable and, full-blown app without knowing how the platform works at its foundation. And when you have to extend React Native, adding new components, and yada, 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 you will also need to bridge those things with native code. So it's not like I'm going to write JavaScript everywhere, and, that's it. Let's say 80-90% of the time you're only going to be dealing with JavaScript. There is a remaining part where you might need to go the extra mile. The thing that I really like about React Native and its philosophy is that they don't really tell you, take the concepts that come from web, okay, from web platforms, put them on an app, and that's going to work. They tell you, look, this just runs your logic in JavaScript, but everything else, you need to think of it as a mobile experience. So when you tap a button, before showing the next scene, you'll have to load all the data to render the next scene so that the user won't face a blank screen, So, and it's very different like from what we do on the web where, a user clicks the link, we open a new page and we wait for it to load. It's very different. So theirs is not like one single trick that will, bring all web developers to be able to write native apps. They tell you, we let you do it in the language you want, but you'll have to adhere to, mobile guidelines in terms of how this thing should look and should feel. You can trash basically what you've learned about the web, and just keep JavaScript on that. And not just JavaScript, it's mostly React, So at the end of the day, a lot of things you've been thinking about, like DOM, like styles, CSS, cascading, and being able to influence, like a parent element or a child element with a style rule, you won't be able to do it in React. It doesn't work like the web. There is no DOM node. There are like views and elements and components, but there is nothing such as like what you've been used to with traditional web platforms. And now, since I think, the most important part of this presentation is actually see how this thing works, I'm just going to throw myself under the bus, hoping that this thing will work, and we'll go through a demo. Now, the thing is, if anything doesn't work, don't blame me. Blame me running a native app on an Android emulator on Ubuntu with a JavaScript framework that gets executed on the JavaScript runtime, yada, yada, yada. So it's not the easiest thing ever. So we've got Genymotion running, okay? It's like probably the most popular and easiest to install and configure emulator. I've got a freshly new installed React Native project. So the way this will generally work is that you'll have an index file, index_android.js. If you bring the same app, the same code to iOS, React Native will look for another file called index_ios.js. So it's smart that way. So what I'm going to have here is I'm going to have this app registry component that I have imported. Can you see the code, by the way?
No, we're turning off the light.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Even more if you want. So I think it's clear for everyone. So we have this app registry where we're going to register our app. And our app will need a main component to run on. And that's why I was saying, I'm not going to explain what React.js here is in this case. I'm just going to show you how React Native differs from it and how it works. So we register our main component, which is called Codemotion. Okay. We have it here. It has one method. It's called render. Okay. It doesn't do much. You will see that I have like some weird elements like view text. These are, components that the React Native team has, built for you to use. Basically, they represent either a view, text, they'll have hyperlink, not really hyperlinks, but, touchable elements and so on and so forth. So it has just one function right now. It renders, that's it. So, whenever you start the app, boom, that's all you see, okay? Now, to add some more things into the mix, and of course, this is how we use the styles. We create a style object from our style sheet. We define it as a plain, JSON object, and then it doesn't even have like all the CSS, variables and properties that you've been used to. It has some custom one. It uses flags, for example, for handling grids and so on. So after you created the styles, you can then assign them to elements. Okay, nothing more, nothing less. It feels a little bit shit.
Can I put the style in another file?
Yeah, look, the whole demo here will work on one single file, just because I don't want to fuck around too much. But you will be able to you'll be able to just use the require and so on. For example, here, there's import blah 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 from React Native. It's exactly what it is. In JavaScript, usually you'll import a module from another source. This is what we do. So you'll be able to say import something from my module, whatever, or the traditional require blah blah blah. Okay, so now this app doesn't really do anything. It's pretty useless. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna add a progress bar. Okay, and this is a React component that comes out of the box with React Native. So I'm gonna say, look, if the state of my component is loaded, okay, I'm gonna render this whole thing that shows everything, okay? Else, we'll just return, I already have it here. We'll just return a simple view with our progress bar. Now, how does React know that that component is loaded or not, that I've set the state to something? Well, we'll have the lifecycle events, the usual lifecycle events that React.js exposes to us, and that's why you will not need to know React Native to make this thing work. You will need to know React.js. So we've got a constructor, okay, and we say we need to set up some stuff for React to be able to work properly, and then we initialize the state. We're gonna be like, okay, it's loaded, it's false, okay? If you're kind enough to save this file. Now what happens, I just have a progress bar loading, This is because the state never changes to loaded. So when this guy is gonna check what it has to render, it will see that the state is always, the loaded flag is always false, and it will always show me my progress bar. Now, what you will definitely want to do in these cases is load some configuration from like the server or something, So we're just gonna say, once, like after 1 second, let's set the state to, let's see if this guy refreshes. Okay, nothing more, nothing less. So it's nothing crazy. It's just like lifecycle events that React.js gives you. As I said here, of course, you won't do a set timeout in general. You will want to load configuration, then set this proper flag, and so on and so forth. Now, projects, Codemotion. Since I'm not that good, I have some examples that are already prepared, and we'll just go through them. Now, as I said, we have like different type of components. The one that add touchable events and highlights to the view, for example. Now, at this point, I've added this touchable native feedback, that it's a component that it's only available on Android. And by the way, if you've seen what I wrote here, this progress bar Android will never work on an iOS app, because the implementation of that component, the native implementation of that component, is not there on iOS, because the UIs, the user experience is much different. You wouldn't have a progress bar on iOS, okay? So they don't give you a tool where you're like, hey, let me write one app that will look the same across platforms. It's like, let me give you components that will make that app look as good as it needs to for that platform. So we've got this touchable native feedback, and when we look at it, see, it has, like this material design thingy of all touchable events. Now, it doesn't look good because it's just like on a text button, but that's, that's the idea. And right now, I've added a new component called Navigator. This is a very important and pretty, it's a milestone on any app, because you need to decide, hey, I have a scene, I want to transition to another scene, yada, yada, yada. So I'm importing a Navigator, which is actually shareable on both platforms here. And what we have here is my main component now. It has a Navigator component. It has an initial route. The name is intro, okay? And then it has a render scene method. So when the Navigator will have to render a scene, it will call this method. Now, in this method, what we do, we decide what scene we need to run. So you see that I'm taking from a list of routes with the one with the name that it comes to me. So for example, the first one will be intro. Okay, I have a list of routes that says, intro. Okay, and then it will just run that scene. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, the Navigator is really important because you will need it to transition between a scene to another one. So for example, right now, what we have is that we have this intro, the first run, because this is the initial route in the stack, okay? Now, if I look at the intro component, I just split, my components as, one should do refactoring. So I have my constructor, I have my render, and then after some time, instead of setting a variable in the state, a flag in the state, I'm just going to say props navigator push. The name of the route is demo. Now, how do I access this navigator thingy? It's because in my render scene component, I receive two variables, the route that I need to render and the navigator object itself. Now, I'm passing it to the component that I load on the fly, and I'm going to have it available in these props, okay? So now I can push my apps here and there. And so once this thing pushes this guy, we're going to be running the demo component. It just renders the regular, view that we had. Now let's try. And after a couple of seconds, boom, it's just going to work, okay? So it's, I think until here, it's, pretty basic functionality of React. And, it's not going to take a genius to work these stuff out. Now, we've got a new touchable event. Oh, one thing that I didn't mention, for example, talking about native components for a platform for another one. For example, in Android, if you want to show a pop-up or whatever, you use the toast, okay? So for example, here I use the toast, okay? And I have it running right here on a touchable native feedback text button. So on press, I will say show something. You can agree, you cannot agree. It's a good example of the toast. And now, with the same thing, we could actually add another touchable native feedback, for example, to show and hide some text or some whatsoever. Now, let me go to step number 7. And this is where it's going to get a little bit trickier, I think. Now, we have another touchable native feedback. It's this guy right here. Tell me something new. On press, we're going to set the state, and we're basically toggle a flag called show, okay? It's basically a true or false, and we're going to toggle it. Now we have a component called fader, okay? And it's going to appear based on this show flag, okay? And I'm configuring it so that it starts from 0 to 1, and we're going to see why, because this controls the opacity of our component. And this is how React Native handles animation. I think it's a very nice framework with this library called Animated. It's really, literally, super easy to use, so it doesn't take a genius. That's why I'm able to. So we have a state, an initial state that says, I'm not going to show this thing. I have, an animated value to start from the props that I'm getting from right in here. It gets passed down to the component. Then I have the render method that will use the opacity that is specified in this state opacity. And we start from 0, okay? From 0. So at the beginning, we're not going to see this text. But once the component will receive props, okay? And this is just like a lifecycle event of React, we're going to be saying, if we're saying show it, now time this animation, take the opacity that's in the state of this particular component to this value, and this is the duration of the animation. So it's really like very simple, okay? I'm going to switch back because I don't want you guys to read that, because I have a t-shirt of the PHP user group in Rome today. They're going to be mad at me. And same thing. Now, this code should definitely be refactored, but you get what it is. When the opacity is higher than like the initial value, we're actually gonna hide it. As simple as that. So I think it's a very powerful framework for handling animations, and they look like pretty smooth. For example, let's pay attention to this transition. I hope this works. Now tell me if you can see frames dropping, because I think you wouldn't be able to. Maybe you'll see 1 or 2 frames dropping in the animation, but I can't really tell the difference if I would do this natively versus React Native, because this is like a very basic, simple animation, and it uses the same exact structure. And this is an example that I blatantly copied from the React playground. I'm just gonna get like an image from the file system, ops.js. I'm just gonna build a new component, and that's what I'm gonna render inside the navigator. Okay, so I'm only gonna render that. And the interesting part at this point is that in the render method we have a transformation property for our image, and it is bound to a value that it's going to bounce thanks to the animation. So initially we say this state bounce value, it starts from animated value 0. So, and then this thing will bounce as soon as we trigger the animation. So as soon as the component mounts, we start the animation and we tell it, like start from a very large image, get down and scale exactly to the window width, to the display width, sorry, and with this friction. Now you can do like other sort of interesting things here. So I don't really know if this would be like much smoother with a native app or not. Now, the usual question that I get when we work on React Native apps is, oh shit, is how do you debug this stuff? Like how you put your hands, like where do you put your hands when anything like goes wrong? And this is like fairly straightforward, because you can still use like the usual traditional tools from JavaScript. So we're gonna be saying console log. Oh shit. Okay. So now our app is gonna be running. I can run. So I have this container running React Native, adb logcat, grep React. Oh. Okay, I'm gonna run the app. I'm just gonna start seeing stuff here. Now, this might be good, but it's definitely not good enough. So that's why these guys are particularly awesome, because they built their own debug. What happens, and this is a very interesting thing, when you're running React Native app on the debugger, it will actually use Chrome to offload all these JavaScript operations. Okay, so it uses V8 in Chrome to run the JavaScript code. Whenever you run it off the debugger, it will actually use the runtime in the OS of the device that you're connected to. So JavaScript core for iOS. So now, what I'm just gonna do is debug in Chrome, boom. Okay, so you get the same exact kind of facilities that you have with a browser JavaScript app. So if you want to expand objects, well, you're welcome to the dinner. And you know. So you can inspect. The interesting thing is that they had also integrations with web view. So if you load a web view on your app, then you can actually see the HTML here, and you know, like debug the web view just if you were in a browser. Okay, so I think that's pretty powerful. And then of course, you know, you get stuff like live reload and so on. You just change your code, and you know, like you see it running right there. I think, you know, it makes it like extremely easy for people to, you know, like start hacking on an app rather than, you know, going through the painful parts of, you know, like doing this thing in Java. I'm pretty opinionated on that. Now, I think what is also nice is that you don't really need all the SDK installed on your system. The way I run React Native apps is I have a Docker containers. It exposes some ports. So I don't have Java. I don't have anything installed on my system. I don't really want to put all that bullcrap on my system. So I can just run it directly with a container. The nice thing is if you need to do anything with the Android SDK, yada, 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 you can still do it through the container. Okay? So this thing is not really installed on my system, but I have it, you know, running. The Docker exposes like, connects to the X socket on my machine, so you can also run GUI programs. And I think, you know, it's really powerful because, like, one night I told myself, you know, I want to start hacking on React Native. How am I going to do this? I will need to install all the SDK and all this stuff. And I was already midnight. I'm like, I'm not up for another, you know, late night again. I saw, you know, someone did a container. We just had to tweak it a little bit, and boom. So whenever you want to run the app, you run it through Docker. That's as good as it can get, you know. When you want to package the app, that's also like pretty straightforward. You have a command that says React Native build. It will do some, you know, performance optimizations and so on. You know, like the first time I think you boot the app, you know, like it will take a while. You can always look at what the packager does with your app. So this is actually, it'll take a bit. This is the entire app, not minified, but, you know, like compressed by the packager. It's a pretty big thing, okay? And actually my code is right at the end. So, you know, like you can always see if the debugger, if the package is running. So what really React Native does, it's, you know, once it runs, it has a packager that bundles everything together. It sends it to, you know, like the base framework of React Native that will be able to offload all the JavaScript computation to the runtime, and that's it. So every time you press a button, you know, you have Watchman running on your machine, and that thing will tell the packager, hey, now you have to rebundle this file, and it will deploy the file again to the to the server. So the interesting thing is, while you run the app, you open it up, it gets bundled. Whenever you change, the app is going to fetch the bundle again. And as you see, is you know, a pretty straightforward process. It doesn't take like very long. So I think this is most of what I wanted to have a look right now. I think, you know, like what is really powerful is that you can start hacking on React Native without any prior knowledge of, you know, mobile development in like 1 minute after this talk. You pull a container, you run it, you need the Genymotion emulator, or you can actually connect your devices. It will work out of the box. Generally, when I develop, I use my device so that, you know, like I don't need emulator stuff running on my machine so that, you know, resources don't get hogged and so on. But, you know, as we said, it's going to be very, very hard for you to, you know, like build a really nice, nifty native app if you don't really know what are the patterns that you know you will need to follow to give a very good mobile experience. And just as, you know, like a last, you know, sum of advices of what we've been, you know, like what we've been bumping to while we were prototyping with React Native. We actually, you know, like we actually built a prototype of our mobile app. We do e-commerce, so we wanted, like, you know, like to try some new development technique around, and we're like, okay, no one can actually hack on the mobile apps like very effectively. Why don't we try React Native? We took, I think, a month of 2-3 guys dedicated like 50% of the time on that, just to learn the platform, learn how it could work, and just, you know, test it around. We built a prototype where you could go from booting the app to checking out, like in that month. And it was really a pet project. dedicated to learn more than that. It went so well that we decided, let's go forward. Let's try to rewrite the Android app, okay? And we'll be seeing, in hopefully 2-3 months how that pays off. Of course, animations, as per what I showed you, they seem like very easy. They're not as easy as they could seem. For example, when the navigator transitions between a scene and another one, it has to animate an entire new view for you while it's transitioning. Those are gonna suck. And the React Native team is aware of these issues. They're working a lot to make this kind of heavier interaction, heavier animations work better. And I think that's quite of a problem for them right now. We don't need and we don't use all those animations. So for us, it's a no-brainer to say, I'm not gonna need this thing to slide, in this manner. If we don't, we just don't use it. I don't know how many of you were at the React.js talk. We're using Redux to build this prototype in-house, but we've seen that it has some pros and cons. For example, to run React Native apps with the navigator and Redux is going to be a bit of a painful thing because Redux will make this opinionated assumption of storing all of your state of all the state of the app in one container, whereas the navigator is actually the one that takes care of navigation, keeping track of history, and so on. So the integration between the two, it's going to suck so much. What we ended up doing is we just plainly used Redux, and we just abandoned Navigator. So we're just using Redux for that, and we managed scene transition with Redux itself. Also, the Navigator is a component that's being debated a lot within the community because it was an initial implementation, and it doesn't perform as good as it should. So what the React Native team has come up with is, they're going to be trying to refactor it in the short term, which might mean 6 months. So I mean, I think if you want to bet on something right now, I think you should try Redux, but see also the pros and cons of that particular library for you because it's very opinionated. As well, the Chrome debugger looks very nice on a demo. It's not always 100% reliable. If you remember, I just mentioned that when you use the debugger, you're going to offload the work of running the JavaScript code on V8 rather than the engine that it's on the mobile the platform. Okay, so they don't work 100% the same. So what happens sometimes, one tricky animation that would work very easy on the device, when you have the debugger and the emulator, the animation gets completely stuck and you can't run it, and that's because exactly they offload execution of your JavaScript code to 2 different engines. So a lot of times our solution is okay, stop the debugger, test this animation without the debugger, but of course it's not 100% there. So you'll face speed bumps. Almost every component that these guys have, it's documented. They have examples, but they don't go too deep in there. So, you'll get, a comprehensive and exhaustive list of, what kind of components can I use, what map implementation does iOS have, what kind of notification implementation does Android have, but there is one example and that's it. Then you're off to reading the source code of React Native, which, might be fun, but if you have better things to do, might also not be that great. And of course, this is a library that, relies quite a bit on, other libraries. So I didn't init the project right here on the demo, because if I had, there wouldn't be enough Wi-Fi for anyone else, while NPM would download all the dependencies. Okay, so I think things might break in between releases. So when you roll out your app on the store, you won't have any problem there. But while you're developing, you're upgrading a dependency, there'll be this speed bump, this problem. It's not compatible with that. You'll have to face those kind of stuff. For us, it's gone pretty decently. We're now super frustrated with the whole process. So we still think that the advantages of developing this thing with this platform, they're far better than resorting to native development. But it's not going to be as smooth as a really native app. Error reporting is still not there. You'll sometimes get a big red stack trace saying unknown, unknown, unknown. So they're working on this kind of stuff. but it's not as good as having like a real world debugger that's built like 5 years ago, and it's been running for like a long time, and it's well tested. It's bottle tested actually. And lots of things are still on the works. I checked the repos this morning. They're one of the top 3, I think, repos on GitHub, because I think a lot of people want to move towards this kind of solution, and they still have 800 open issues, which is like a humongous number. They also have 3,000 of them that they have closed. But what you can observe right now is that a lot of times they tell people, look, we don't have this thing implemented in React Native. Why don't you guys send a PR rather than us? It's 20 people from Facebook that work on this thing, and their priority is, of course, Facebook before the community. So at the end of the day, they also have limited resources. What they say is that at the end of the day, sometimes, the needs of Facebook are pretty well aligned with the needs of the community, so a lot of stuff they can actually hook it in. For us, for example, web views weren't working because we need local storage for a particular part of our app, and what we actually needed to dig into the code, add some couple mappings on the Java code base, send them a PR. They integrated it after a while that was in master. So I think they would be very, very happy to have external contributors for that. And the state of React Native for them is, the Groups app on iOS uses React Native. The Ad Manager on Android uses React Native. But the main Facebook app also uses React Native. So they won't be able to rewrite it completely with React Native because their thoughts is, it doesn't make sense. It's a huge code base, like lots of years and lots of manpower in there. It doesn't really make sense today to say, let's start rewriting it from scratch, but they have parts of the app that are using React Native today, okay? So if you're asking me, is this, stable enough? I would say stable enough for Facebook, So I'm definitely like a smaller fish than Facebook to go for it, So, and that's why, we're pretty confident that this thing could actually work pretty well. No matter what, the mobile landscape will change in probably 3-5 years, because people are really, 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 really bored of rewriting the same exact thing twice. And that is it. As I said, I think I'm almost out of time. I think the most important thing is see how this platform looks and feels. With a demo, I think that's the best way to have a look at it. If you have any questions, you'll be able to hook me later on. I'll be very happy. It would be really, really interesting to see and understand if other people have, had problems or, they've tried the React Native way and see how they would work. I'm pretty sure, there will be a lot of speed bumps. It's not going to be as easy as, you would have it on a web app, but I think it's very, very promising. We're buying to it. We're betting on it. So I think it's going to be really the next big thing in mobile development, or it will influence the next big thing in mobile development. Because I think the idea is very good. I think the performances they can achieve, because it's native at the end of the day, they're amazing. So I think they did a really, really good job doing this bridge that finally lets us write a common language between two platforms. To close out, I'm Alex. You'll find me on Twitter at _Odino_. I work in Namshi, which is an e-commerce retailer in Dubai. So we do a lot of stuff, and amongst those, we also have mobile apps that our customers use to purchase their shoes. I'm VP of Tech there. You can find me ranting on odino.org. Usually very useless stuff, but sometimes I might say something smart, but very little times. Thank you very much. Does anyone have questions?
Yeah, two questions actually. Which is the right approach to rewrite the application in iOS, for example?
So I don't always think that rewriting is the right approach. What these guys have done with the main Facebook app is they plugged in React in parts of it, And that's also something that we consider. We consider, take the app, start, plugging some of the views with React Native and so on. I'd be scared. Our app is not as big as the Facebook one, so I wouldn't want to go for it, and we decided to rewrite. The way we did it, we sat down with the product management team, we asked them, and with the mobile developers, we asked them, look, what are the things that we need to work on? and from there we started. The nice thing for us is anyhow 60% of the logic that the app does, it's on the server because it's served through APIs. So the app is really the view layer of it. So rewriting that part for us is not crazy. But if you're rewriting an app that's complete logic on the app itself, that's going to be a little bit more.
You actually can save only the business logic because you have to rewrite the view layer. Let's say.
Yeah.
You have to create a wrap of the UI. Or you should write two different views.
In what sense?
Because we have seen that we have, for example, progress bar Android. So you have to actually rewrite the code for the iOS counterpart.
So in that sense, to share it also like between platforms, the interesting part is that they don't tell you write once and use it anywhere. It's learn once, use it everywhere. So because the user experience is very different on Android and iOS devices, they're like, look, you have these components on iOS, you have these components on Android, deal with it. So you're not just going to take a file and run it always, all the time on both platforms. So the view, most likely the view parts are going to be different. But the logic, that's what you're going to be able to share. So I think what they said is, they're able to reuse 70% of the code, and that's, the important part, the actual logic. Whereas the views, you have to tweak the way it works on iOS and Android, of course.
Okay, the second question, is it similar to native script, this React Native, or?
Sorry?
Native script is a kind of library with JavaScript that actually is a bridge between the native
world. I was reading this morning about something about Angular and native script, but I haven't, to be fair, I've never heard of it, so I wouldn't know. Anyone else? Thank you very much.